G8.
I was cycling from sheer terror to feeling quite powerful, and from loving people to hating people.
We all grow up living in fear of going crazy, and to have that stamp on you at any age is life-changing. Doesn't matter how you deal with it.
In my bed, inside my
electroconvulsive therapy, lobotomies, I didn't want any of it.
What you're listening to there is the trailer to a documentary screening at the World Cinema Showcase kicking off in Auckland today, and then moving its way around the country. This documentary looks at the secret, often shameful history of New Zealand's psychiatric hospitals, and it's laid bare in this documentary called Mental Notes by filmmaker Jim Marbrook, who joins us right now here in the Kiwi studio. Jim, welcome.
Hi, Glenn.
To
Thanks
the
for
show.
having me in.
Yeah. Finally, a documentary about this often sort of skirted around sort of subject. Not a lot of people want to talk about the history of New Zealand's mental health system, do they?
No, and it often, I mean, when I think back to my youth, they were the scary places.
They were, weren't they?
You know, I mean, you were from Christchurch, you were telling me.
Well, Auckland via Christchurch.
Well, there's the sunny side, and,
yeah,
which probably wasn't very sunny.
Well, for me as a student in Auckland, it was like, oh, we'll send you to Carrington. You know,
Yeah.
that was, and everyone like, no, not Carrington.
Yeah. So there's this real kind of stigma behind these places, and I wanted to dig into that, but I also wanted to kind of tell a historical kind of story as well.
Yeah, about how these institutions were originally set up.
What I've done is I followed 5 people who have been through the institutional system.
Yeah.
So I wanted to collect some people together who lived quite different experiences in some respects. Like there was a woman who was admitted to a psychiatric hospital when she was 9 years old.
Yeah.
As a ward of the state. That's quite extreme.
Yeah.
There was John Tovey, is a man who I interviewed him with his partner. So that was another insight.
Yeah.
Anne Helm, who I think is really, really interesting kind of commentator on the psych system. She was a member of a forum, a confidential forum that came out and had a report out. It started in 2005. The report came out in 2007. And she was a part of that, and that collected stories of abuse and mistreatment from those days of institutions. So she was a key part of it.
So you've told the story of the system through these individuals. Was it difficult to find these individuals and difficult to get anyone who actually wanted to talk about it?
I mean, some people were more willing than others. I've known Anne for a while, and I originally just approached her to talk about her role on the forum. And as we talked, I said, well, you know, if you want to talk about any other of your personal experiences, talk about them. And she felt comfortable enough to do that, so I'm really grateful.
Yeah.
There were people that really didn't want to revisit anything, and I think I specifically chose people who could look back and kind of analyse what they lived as well. And sometimes that came, in the case of Frances, the woman who was a ward of the state, it came through her meeting her psychiatrist.
Yes.
Who a helpful psychiatrist that she had some really good contact with. And so I wanted people to be able to reflect and analyse, and I didn't want it to be a very heavy look at the psych system, even though I knew it would go to some dark places.
Eventually it would, yeah. And people end up in these institutions, because that's what happened a few decades ago. If you had some kind of psychiatric illness, you were put away into one of these, what they call bins, right?
Well, that's the kind of colloquial term, yeah, the loony bin. Bin, chucked in the bin.
Yeah.
And of course,
or the asylum, as they were.
Well, yeah,
originally called as well.
One of the psychiatrists in the film talks about that, you know, that concept of asylum, a safe place.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I found out is once the scale of these places grew, the idea of an asylum rapidly changed into a kind of prison, because they became places to contain people.
That's right.
And not so much places to heal.
Yeah. But these places were created based on the knowledge of the day and the medical treatments of the day, weren't they?
They were created to a certain extent on the knowledge of the day, but in the same token, there were ministers in the 1870s, and I'm stepping back into history here, who were convinced, despite all the evidence that was coming across their tables, that they had to build these big kind of, edifices that would kind of mark their term in government. So the evidence was pretty clear from the very beginning that smaller, more family or personal kind of orientated kind of facilities were best.
Yeah,
that was clear.
In the process of the documentary, you visit these abandoned hospitals spread out in various locations around the country. One of them being in Te Awamutu. That place was called Tokanui.
Yeah.
Now, when I look at them, I go, okay, they're run down, abandoned, but the grounds these places are situated on look pleasant, look peaceful. You know, they don't look like prisons as such or anything like that. They look like sort of, a nice country, idyllic sort of location. Is that the feeling you got from them when you visited?
I think I was seeing it through and filming it through a patient's experience. So I was very mindful. I mean, there's a scene in the film where we drive, Roy Brown and I drive past the place where there was horse riding.
Yeah.
Now, Roy doesn't have that memory of horse riding, but for some of the children who were disabled, that was part of the facility there at Tokanui. I think... for Lake Alice, I think Tokanui, I talk about some of the positives of that place. I talk about the Whaiora unit there, which was a real positive. Yeah. In terms of treatment of Māori patients. But I don't see. I think I've heard so many stories that I don't really see
them in that light.
See them in the kind of gentle, bucolic kind of country item.
Because essentially they were placed in places like that because they were out of the city, out of the way, out of sight, out of mind then?
I think, and that's actually the title of, I think it's the history of Porirua Hospital. Huh. Out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Tokanui was originally kind of conceived as like a place where they could, contain the overflow of patients that were coming from elsewhere. So it was advantageous that it was out in the countryside. Yeah.
You also look at the various treatments through the decades as well, from more physical treatments like ECT, which was just essentially a torture chamber sort of scenario, really, wasn't it? Electric shock treatment?
Yeah, well, originally in its original form, and I guess you can, if you read Janet Frame's autobiography and her novels, you get some clear views of fiction from her fiction and her autobiography. You get some very clear views on what it was like in the early days without anaesthetic or muscle relaxant, and we have, we do talk about that in mental notes. It's still being used today.
Is it? I had no idea.
Yeah, in fact, I was on a radio show the other day that was focused on mental health, and a woman called up and she said, we were talking about ECT, and a woman called up and said, well, you guys, you've ruined my day, you've ruined my evening. And we said, well, why have we ruined your evening? She said, well, I'm booked in to get my ECT tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And I don't want to go anymore. I've even booked the taxi. And, of course, we tried to, handle that as best as we could. And I was on air with a psychiatrist, and he talked to her off air. But it is still being used as a treatment. And there are people that are trying to stop its use. So there are. I'm not a clinician, but people have told me that it can be effective for some things, like very deep depression.
Okay.
But in the context of repeated shocks and overuse, which is its history, it was quite scary.
Which was also the history of pharmaceuticals as well, wasn't it? The initial overuse and prescribing of drugs.
Those were the stories that were told to me, and by people that were prescribing in those days, that they were very heavy-handed, and conversely, when the first medications came out, there was this feeling that, hey, we actually have some medication that can help.
Yeah.
But as one of the nurses says in the doco, it did come with some some bad side effects.
Obviously, the nature of the documentary is very, very personal to the individuals involved. But it feels to me that perhaps the making of the documentary is also personal between you and the individuals in the documentary as well. Am I right to assume that it's basically just you? You're the one-man documentary unit?
I started off working with the director of photography, Sean O'Donnell, but then we ran out of money, so...
Right, so essentially, by necessity...
By necessity, I had to finish it off myself.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I had an editor, Priska Boucher, and she was, fantastic.
Are you holding the camera? And
so I'm doing everything, basically, in most of those interviews, yeah.
Do you find that difficult, being able to talk to someone while pointing the camera at them at the same time?
Yes, it is slightly difficult. It's a bit delicate because, there's a lot to concentrate on.
Yeah.
Focus.
Because because there's a camera on you now here in the studio, but it's to the side and it's kind of outside of our
and these
conversation.
Cameras, very wide angle lens.
Yes.
No focus problems.
Yeah.
You've got audio set up here.
Yeah.
No problems there.
But if I was to say get my phone and point that out in front of me and point it at you while talking to you, it's quite something to get round that, isn't there?
The context for me is I've done it before, and I do have a bit of a working method that I follow. So I'm not a stranger to shooting like that, and it was a necessity, but it also is a very nice way to shoot because you come into somebody's house. I mean, I was talking about Anne, the interview with Anne Helm, and I just came into her house by myself.
Yeah.
And set
less
up.
Threatening.
And we had a cup of tea, and it's nice. It's more intimate.
Yeah.
I think it's nicer for both parties, but there are some attendant kind of risks in the quality of the picture if you mess up.
Yeah, true. Well, I think it's an essential documentary for people to go and see at the World Cinema Showcase, and hopefully, fingers crossed, beyond as well.
We're trying to get a run together. It is playing in the main centres, but we want it to get out there and play cinemas.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Good. Well, Jim Marbrook has been my guest. If you want to see all the screening times, Auckland this weekend.
This weekend's the premiere's at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
6 p.m. Sunday there's an 1:50 showing, and that's at the Rialto. Both of those are the Rialto on Broadway, and 11:30 Monday matinee at the Rialto, and then once again at the Bridgeway, 4 o'clock the following Sunday.
Brilliant.
Which is the 8th, I think.
WorldCinemaShowcase.co.nz for all the show times as well, and check out the trailer there. Jim, thanks very much for joining us here on the show today.